It's late. The moon hangs suspended in the dark sky above, its crescent shape hiding behind a wall of black clouds. Thunder growls throughout, and rain begins to fall from the heavens, pattering off the surface of your window as you peer outside into the void of nightfall around you. The orange flickering glow of the lantern at your bedside reflects off the glass before you, obscuring your vision in a haze of uncertainty as you watch the villagers scramble about for cover from the impending storm. Or perhaps you think they are seeking refuge from something else. A creature that stalks its prey beneath the light of the moon, moving swiftly amongst the shadows and striking from deep within them. A monster whose name instills cold dread within you. One by one, the villagers have been disappearing from their homes, and you begin to wonder if tonight it will be your turn. Another boom of thunder startles you, your mind previously infected with the fear the very notion of such creatures bring upon you. You reach over beside you and you grab your lantern. Another glance through the window reveals empty streets, abandoned by the residents as another crack of thunder explodes overhead. Your husband is still out there, somewhere, and you are beginning to worry. You move through the small home, your feet scuffling across old wood, floorboards creaking and whining beneath your weight, the glow of your lantern pushing aside the darkness of each room you pass through, making your way steadily to the door. You reach out a hand to open it, a flash of purple lightning sizzling above as you slide your lantern over the threshold, its yellow-orange flicker doing little to illuminate the blackness before your home. The yard is covered with it, thin tendrils of mist from the nearby lake writhing in and out of its heavy layers, and another flash of lightning shows the large tree at the end of your path, its branches lurching through at you like fingers of the night. A breath of cool air breathes off the nearby lake, whispering shrill things into your ears with an icy voice. You take your first step forward, the wood of your porch groaning in protest, perhaps uttering a warning of things still to come. He was supposed to be home hours ago, given the new curfew that had been established in light of the recent disappearances. You wonder why he hasn't come home yet, your heart beginning to increase its solitary rhythm, your mind beginning to collapse beneath the stress of what ifs and how comes. Another step forward, your hand getting shaky beneath the weight of the lantern, its flame withering as the wick beneath it shortens, and you feel a cold rush of air pass before you. Thunder rumbles in the distance, the rain beginning to fall harder. Sweat builds upon your brow, spilling down into your eyes, and your fingers are clammy. Whether from the cold night air or the rising paranoia within you, you aren't sure. Something screams in the distance, startling you once more, causing you to swivel about with the lantern pointed out before you in hopes of seeing something, anything, through the pressing darkness of the night. Still, it gets colder, the air biting at your exposed arms and fingers, sending chills up your spine even, and you can see your breath floating there before the glow of your lantern. Another rush of air passes over you, this one closer, but nothing stirs around you. The lakeside breeze breathes again, carrying with it the hiss of something behind you, its hand reaching out to fall upon your shoulder. You whirl around at once, shivering beneath its touch, only you see nothing standing there. Your heart begins to thump steadily within your chest, each pound sending vibrations of uneasiness throughout your being, fear pumping through your veins. The rain falls harder still, thunder crashes overhead, another whisper of cold wind causes you to turn once again. The light of your lantern stretching through the archway of your open door. Lightning pulses wildly above, illuminating the dark shadow that is standing in the middle of your living room. Pale, grotesque flesh, long sharp claws hanging at its knees, high pointed ears atop its head, eyes blazing red and cruel, fangs glinting through the haze of your lantern's flame. More lightning flashes and the creature is gone. Fear paralyzes you completely now, cold, slithery dread poisoning your nerves, and you can feel the gaze of something watching you through the darkness. A hand falls upon your shoulder. A scream rises from your throat as you turn around to see your husband standing there before you, his hair soaked, droplets of water running down their compressed strands, his eyes bloodshot and tired, his body and shoulders heaving up and down as his breath came and went in short, frantic bursts. You step closer to him, offering him your hand, telling him it's okay, urging him to come inside, and then lightning pulses with angry fever above, revealing the mouth of fangs that is coming down upon your neck, your blood spilling to lace itself with the falling rain. Death begins to consume you as your blood burns hot, the essence of life within you dissipating, the creature suckling your neck, growing in strength as your blood now flows over its razor-like fangs. This, my friends, is what is known as the vampire's kiss, and vampires are going to serve as our topic for tonight's lesson. I am your nightly host, Samantha Rose, and I welcome you all to a reality of supernatural creatures and legends of the obscure. Because there is a rather long history of walking corpses and blood-sucking creatures in folklore, it can be quite difficult for one to track down the exact set of characteristics that are consistently attributed to vampires. Central to vampire mythos, however, is the consumption of human blood as a necessity for the vampire's survival. Other essences have been depicted as well, such as bodily fluids or even psychic energy. And this traditional belief is followed closely by the possession of sharp teeth or fangs with which to partake in the act of blood-sucking. In most depictions, vampires are often considered as undead beings, meaning they have somehow been revived after their initial time of death, such as is the case with zombies. And many are said to rise nightly from their graves, which are often considered to be coffins, which are usually found on their native ground. Vampires are typically said to be of pale skin and range vastly in appearances, from the grotesque monstrosities to preternaturally beautiful and alluring, depending on the particular tale you listen to. Another frequently cited physical characteristic is the inability to cast a reflection or even a shadow, which translates to an inability to be photographed or recorded on film. Someone can become a vampire in a variety of ways, the most common of which is to be bitten by a vampire, which changes you into one of them. Other methods include sorcery, committing suicide, contagion, or having a cat jump over a person's corpse for some reason. Some people believe that babies born with teeth or on Christmas Day or somewhere between Christmas and Epiphany were predisposed to becoming vampires, and while vampires usually do not die of natural disease or other normal human afflictions, they are indeed often said to have faster than normal healing capabilities. There are various methods for their ultimate destruction, the most popular of these being a wooden stake through the heart, fire, which purifies everything, decapitation, and exposure to sunlight. Vampires are often depicted as being repelled by garlic, though I have personally never understood this belief. Running water or Christian implements, such as crucifixes and holy water. In some other stories, vampires may enter the home of another person only if they have been invited inside, and in others, they may be distracted by the scattering of objects, such as grains or seeds, that they are then compelled to count, thereby enabling potential victims to escape their undead clutches. Interesting stuff, especially that last one. Creatures with vampiric characteristics have appeared as far back as ancient Greece, like most myths and legends it seems, where stories were told of creatures that would attack people in their sleep and drain their bodily fluids. Tales of walking corpses that drank the blood of the living and spread plague flourished in medieval Europe in times of disease, and people lacking a modern understanding of infectious disease came to believe that those who became vampires preyed first upon their own families. Research from the 20th and the 21st centuries has posited that characteristics associated with vampires can be traced back to certain diseases: porphyria, which makes one extremely sensitive to sunlight; tuberculosis, which causes wasting away; pellagra, a disease that thins the skin, and rabies, which causes biting and general sensitivities that could lead to repulsion by light or garlic. Again, okay. Vampire myths were especially popular in Eastern Europe, and the word vampire itself most likely originates from that region. Digging up the bodies of suspected vampires was practiced in several cultures throughout Europe, and it is often thought that the natural characteristics of decomposition, such as receding gums and the appearance of growing hair and fingernails, reinforce the belief that corpses were, in fact, continuing some manner of life after death. Also, possibly contributing to this belief was the pronouncement of death for people who were not dead. Because of the constraints of medical diagnosis at the time, people that were very ill or sometimes even very drunk and in a coma or in shock were thought to be dead and then later miraculously revived, sometimes too late to prevent their burial. Belief in vampires led to such rituals as staking corpses through the heart before they were buried. And in some cultures, the dead were buried face down to prevent them from finding their way out of their graves. How many of you knew that already, I wonder? The modern incarnation of vampire myth seems to have stemmed largely from Gothic European literature of the 18th and 19th centuries, about the time that vampire hysteria was peaking in Europe. Vampiric figures appeared in 18th century poetry, such as Heinrich August Ossenfelder's Der Vampir in 1748, which is about a seemingly vampiric narrator who seduces an innocent maiden. Vampire poems began appearing in English about the turn of the 19th century, such as John Stagg's The Vampire in 1810 and Lord Byron's The Giaour in 1813. The first prose vampire story that was published in English is believed to be John Pilidori's The Vampire in 1819, about a mysterious aristocrat named Lord Ruthven who seduces young women only to drain their blood and disappear all over again. Those works, and others like them, inspired subsequent material for the stage even. Later, important vampire stories include the serial Varney the Vampire or The Feast of Blood between 1845 and 1847, and The Mysterious Stranger in 1853, which are all cited as possible early influence for Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897 and Théophile Gautier's La Morte Amorosa and Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, which established the vampire femme fatale. Dracula, my personal favorite book, is arguably the most important work of vampire fiction. The tale of the Transylvanian count who uses supernatural abilities, including the novel mind control and shape-shifting, to prey upon innocent victims inspired countless works that came after. Many popular vampire characteristics, such as methods of survival and destruction, vampires as aristocracy, and even vampires being of Eastern European origin, were solidified in this legendary novel, and especially more so through its 1931 film adaptation, which starred the Hungarian-born actor Bela Lugosi. The novel itself, however, is thought to have been inspired by the cruel acts of the 15th century prince, Vlad III Dracula of Transylvania, also known as Vlad the Impaler, who, for those curious, I will be talking about at a later time, just as I will with Elizabeth Bathory. Speaking of Elizabeth Bathory, she was also a huge inspiration for Stoker's Dracula, the evil countess who was believed to have murdered dozens of young women during the 16th and 17th centuries in order to bathe in their blood to preserve her own vitality. Dracula would, in turn, go on to inspire the film Nosferatu in 1922, in which a vampire was first depicted as being vulnerable to sunlight. Other aspects of the movie, however, were so similar to Stoker's iconic novel that his widow sued for copyright infringement, and several copies of the film were then subsequently destroyed. For several decades, the vast majority of vampire fiction, whether on the page or the stage or the silver screen, showed the influence of Dracula. Both the novel and its film variation spawned several different sequels and spin-offs, including the film Dracula's Daughter in 1936 and a number of Hammer films, including Dracula, also known as Horror of Dracula in 1958, which starred the immortal Christopher Lee in the titular role. Vampires became popular characters in various pulp magazines and appeared in stories such as Sherlock Holmes' tale The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire in 1924. In 2009, the original author's great-grandnephew, Dr. Stoker, and Ian Holt published an official sequel called Dracula the Undead, using notes and excisions from Dracula. During the 20th century, vampires began to turn from being depicted as predominantly animalistic creatures and instead displayed a broader range of human characteristics. Ray Bradbury explored the sympathetic portrayal of what can be thought of as monsters, including vampires, in Homecoming, a story about a normal boy with a family of fantastical creatures. The popular American television soap opera Dark Shadows, which ran from 1966 to 1971, featured a lovelorn vampire, Barnabas Collins. In 1975, Fred Saberhagen published The Dracula Tape, which was a retelling of Stoker's original story from the misunderstood villain's point of view. Vampire fiction entered a brand new era, it seemed, with the sympathetic portrayal by Anne Rice in her fantastic read Interview with the Vampire in 1976. Rice's book introduced the world to vampires that were brooding and self-loathing and squabbled like humans. While Rice's vampires were much more vulnerable emotionally than vampires previously had been, they were less vulnerable physically, susceptible only to daylight and fire and the death of the first of their kind, and they possessed superhuman beauty, speed, and senses. Interview with the Vampire was hugely popular among the masses, and it sparked a major revival of vampire fiction as a whole that lasted well into the 21st century, and subsequent vampire stories continue to use characteristics established by Anne Rice. Rice herself wrote several more books in what became known as the Vampire Chronicles, some of which were later adapted into film. The vampire as a misunderstood romantic hero picked up a lot of steam in the later part of the 20th century, particularly so in the United States. In 1978, Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough began publishing her series of Count Saint Germain books, the main character of which is a vampire of moral character whose bite is an erotic experience. In many tales, vampires are characterized as being highly promiscuous, their appetite for human blood paralleling their sexual appetite. In 1991, Laurie Herder published Obsession, one of the first vampire novels to actually be categorized as romance rather than science fiction, fantasy, or horror. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a television show in which the titular character has a star-crossed romance with a vampire, aired from 1997 to 2003. Vampire romances also appeared in the incredibly steamy HBO television series True Blood, which was based on Charlaine Harris's Sookie Stackhouse book series. Vampire romance for teens gained a spike in popularity at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, with books such as the Vampire Diaries series by L.J. Smith and The Twilight Saga by Stephanie Meyer. The Twilight Saga, with its high school romance and vampires that sparkled in the sun rather than bursting into a ball of flames and misery, became a cultural sensation, ensuring a vampire trend that lasted for years to come. Vampire relationships of a different sort were explored in the novel Lat den Rat Koma In, or Let the Right One In 2004 by John Ajvide Lindqvist. I am sorry if I said that wrong. In which the main characters are a particularly childlike vampire and a young boy that she befriends and helps fend off bullies. The book was adapted for film in Sweden in 2008 and in the United States as Let Me In 2010. Vampires also went on to enjoy popularity as unlikely action heroes. Blade, a half-vampire superhero that first showed up in Marvel comic books and became the focus of 3 films from 1998, 2002, and 2004. Another hugely popular film series, Underworld, which I mentioned a bit about in my Werewolf video with the gorgeous Kate Beckinsale from 2003, 2006, 2009, and 2012, all explored an ongoing war between vampires and werewolves. Dracula himself, known as Alucard, Dracula spelled backwards, even became an action hero in the Japanese manga and anime Hellsing, and in the likes of Castlevania by Konami. Angel, the vampire with a soul and the love interest of Buffy the Vampire Slayer title character, became the star of his own spin-off television series in which he acts as a private detective from 99 to 04. And the tabletop role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade, first published in 91, which contributed words such as sire, a vampire's progenitor, and embrace, the act of making a new vampire, to the vampire lexicon, allowing for players to create their very own vampire worlds and pit warring vampire factions against each other in bloody battle. Although vampires had, by the 20th century, largely become creatures of fantasy, urban myths about vampires continued to persist. As late as the early 20th century, some villages in Bulgaria still practiced corpse impaling. In the 1960s and 70s, a vampire was believed to haunt London's Highgate Cemetery, and in the early 21st century, whispers of vampires caused a massive uproar in Malawi and England alike. And so, my listeners of history, concludes our lesson about the history of the vampire. There wasn't really a lot of information out there about the history of the vampire, which is what I wanted over anything else, and everything I've said in this video only goes to show that vampires are, and always have been, a huge influence on modern media, horror, popular culture, and literature, and will continue to be so for many more years still to come. Vampires are awesome creatures of myth. They are my personal favorite supernatural creature to learn and talk about, and I hope you guys all had a good time out there listening to me run my mouth about them. Remember though, guys, every myth holds a bit of truth. I have been Samantha Rose, and I bid you all adieu. Until next time.